Most conversations about chiropractic focus on techniques, reimbursement, or internal disagreements, but none of those are the real problem. The real problem is much bigger, and it rarely gets discussed. Chiropractic is one of the most underrepresented forms of healthcare on the planet, not because it doesn't work, not because people don't need it, but because it never scaled. Let's start with a simple fact. There are roughly 100,000 chiropractors in the world, conservatively. The global population is over 8 billion. That means there is roughly one chiropractor for every 80,000 people. Think about that for a moment. If chiropractic disappeared tomorrow, most of the world would not even notice, not because it isn't valuable, but because they have never had access to it. That is not a demand problem. That is a reach problem. Now, layer in the regulatory reality. There are 193 countries in the world. Only about 48 of them have clear laws or regulations governing chiropractic. That's roughly 25%. So, over 130 countries are unregulated or legally unclear. And in about a dozen countries, chiropractic is effectively illegal. So, in most of the world, chiropractic is unknown, misunderstood, or not legally viable. Again, not because it lacks efficacy, but because it lacks infrastructure, scale, and influence. This creates a quiet but dangerous cycle. When a profession is small, it has limited political power. When it has limited political power, legislation moves slowly or not at all. When legislation lags, investment avoids the category. When investment avoids the category, research, education, and growth stall. And when growth stalls, the profession stays small. That is the loop chiropractic is stuck in. Now add the workforce reality. Graduation rates in many regions are flat or declining. Student debt is rising. Reimbursement pressure is increasing. Burnout is real, and early exits from practice are common. Young people look at the profession and ask a fair question. Is this sustainable? Is this scalable? Is there a future here? If profitability is fragile and upside is capped, fewer people enter. If fewer people enter, reach never expands, and the cycle continues. This is why effort alone has not solved the problem. Chiropractors work hard, and they always have, but effort does not fix structural issues. A single practitioner, no matter how skilled or how hard they work, cannot change global access, and 100,000 practitioners cannot either. This is not a failure of dedication, it is a failure of design. Think of it like this. If you want to supply clean water to a city, you don't ask individual families to dig deeper wells, you build infrastructure. Chiropractic has been digging wells when it really needs plumbing. Now, here is where the conversation gets uncomfortable but necessary. To expand research, you need funding. To improve efficiency and capacity, you need systems. To influence legislation globally, you need scale and coordination. To attract the next generation, the profession must be economically viable and rewarding. None of that happens at scale without new equity flowing into the profession. This is where many people get stuck. They treat capital as a threat rather than a tool, but capital always flows somewhere. If it doesn't flow into chiropractic intentionally, it will flow around it. And here is the critical insight. Well executed exits are not the end of the story, they are how the next chapter gets funded. Exits create capital signals. Capital signals attract more investment. Investment funds research, systems, education, and reach. Without that loop, the profession remains small, regardless of how effective the care is. Now, here is the part most people miss. It may actually be a blessing in disguise that private equity has not yet heavily invested in chiropractic. In many areas of healthcare, consolidation happened before physicians realized what they were giving up. Ownership quietly shifted upstream. By the time capital arrived, doctors were negotiating pay, not owning systems. Chiropractic is different. For the most part, chiropractors still own their practices, and that is rare in healthcare. Not because the profession was smarter, but because it was overlooked. That delay preserved ownership, and that creates a rare window. We can learn from what went wrong elsewhere. We can see what happens when systems are built around billing instead of outcomes. We can see what happens when growth is extracted instead of designed. And we still have time to choose a better path. Think of it like designing a house. You don't decide where the foundation goes after the concrete is poured, you decide first. Chiropractic is standing at that moment. The question is not whether change is coming, it is. The question is whether the profession designs its future or inherits it. because professions don't disappear overnight. They shrink quietly, they lose influence, they lose reach, they lose ownership until one day they are still practicing but no longer shaping their own destiny. This conversation is not about fear, it is about stewardship. If chiropractic is going to move into its next global era, it will require better research, greater efficiency and capacity, stronger legislation, real profitability, and ownership structures that attract capital without sacrificing care or legacy. That path exists, but it requires thinking beyond individual practices and short term income. It requires building systems, platforms, and exits that fund the future instead of closing the door on it. This is the conversation I am inviting you to because the real risk is not change. The real risk is doing nothing while the window is still open. So, this isn't a conclusion, it's a starting point. If you care about the long term viability of the profession, you're in the right place. Windows like this don't stay open forever. While most of healthcare is reacting to consolidation, chiropractic still has a chance to design its future. That's the window we're standing in today.